Okay, so figured we'd get started. I
Hmm.
found myself again, this is not about the artist, this is not about slamming anybody, this is completely about mesh and how to deal with it, yeah? Some of you may
Sure.
recognize it. It's vaguely reminiscent of a Mass Effect Viper, mostly because I'm a big Mass Effect junkie, as many of you know. Um, and I just like the, what should I say, sniper McSniper faces in that series, even though I prefer to play as a Vanguard. Um, okay, this is the kind of mesh that you very often pick up in brokerages. It's a decent model, but the topology is not so good because it's, what shall I say, pre-triangulated, which is not always a good thing if you need to remap for texturing, because it makes it harder for both the algorithms and you to unwrap this. And this also goes to show that no matter how good an algorithm, um, you're usually better off mixing an algorithm with manual cuts. So I think I'm going to start with unwrapping the barrel, and I'm going to show you that it's, no pun intended, not as cut and dry as it sometimes seems to just do an auto unwrap. So, oh yeah, I'm pressing the show model selection group thingy. So that's how I'm selecting. So first thing I'm going to do is to hit I for isolate. Uh, and then I'm going to hit F2 to show you I'm hitting edge mode. I'm going to do hard edges, and in auto seams, if you choose the hard edge algorithm, when you drag the slider down, you will get more cuts. If you drag the slider up, you'll get less cuts. So this is angle based. So I'm going to go for a 45-ish, 46-ish degree angle. And as you can see, the algorithm does something that we like and then something else we don't like, because apparently it's forgotten how to cut a cylinder. So if we cut it now, you'll end up with this. Not exactly what we need. So I'm going to drag it down maybe even more. And again, this is where you actually need to fiddle a bit just to see what kind of cut
It's
you get. But
bit of trial and error, isn't it?
yes, so I know that some people get disappointed if it's not perfect in the first go, but an algorithm can never replace what you're seeing with your eyes and what you need to have as a decent unwrap in Paint. So, but for this island over here, I'm just going to mouse over it and then I'm going to hit U, because there really isn't much. I know that there's a discussion going on about detaching this. I usually prefer not to, uh, but I know that you have some points of view on that, Paul.
Yeah, it depends really on in terms of what you're going to do with it. I guess before we even get to that, just on your point about the algorithm, I think algorithms are only as good as what you feed into them. So generally speaking, like these algorithms are probably designed to work with meshes that haven't been triangulated. So in an ideal scenario or in a pipeline where you control what you're doing, you're unlikely to encounter a mesh like this. This would be more kind of an example, I guess, of maybe a mesh that you've been sent. Maybe if you were working freelance or something, or if your company acquired meshes from a third-party provider, sometimes they can come in this sort of way that they're triangulated. But generally speaking, when you come to unwrap, you're not going to have to deal with this. So this is quite a challenging mesh for an algorithm or indeed a person to unwrap, just because of the additional edges that have been created. In terms of the detachment, again, as I said, it depends on what you're going to do with it. So generally speaking, a lot of game res meshes, you're generally going to try and prep them as best you can for baking. So the typical workflow for a game res mesh is that you're going to have two versions of the mesh. You're going to have a high poly, and you're going to have a low poly. And the high poly will have the additional details, which you will then bake down to the low poly. And part of that process is getting an unwrap that supports you doing that. And in that case, quite often, where there's a hard edge, generally speaking, we would advise that you would have a border, a UV border edge as well. So it depends on what you're going to do with it, I guess.
Yeah. So one thing that I tend to do, I'm just doodling here. I prefer to attach these and then just keep them around because I find that my unwrap gets really messy if I don't.
Hmm.
But in general, this is not something that you should do. You should always detach them because it just affects your bake. Right, Paul? And the reason I was just
Yeah.
taking it slow with here is that um, this is where you enter in what I would call pain in the ass country because even if you have geometric on and if you are in edge select mode in RizomUV and you do geometric, it will go by geometry and not edges, which is very handy for stuff like this. The problem is that it's got so many double edges that you actually need to check manually where to put your cuts. So
Okay.
that one would very easily turn into loose poly. So that's why I was messing around with that. So, but now it's unwrapped and gone. Another thing that I usually tend to do is just hide as yeah, see, loose polys, which is why
Yeah.
hashtag pain in the ass. Um, but yeah, just hide it.
Hide those.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah, actually they won't be hidden. I think maybe that's about, yeah, they won't be hidden. Okay. I'll just leave them for now.
Yeah.
Same goes for this one.
Here.
Also,
Hmm.
for those new to Rhizom, I'm using the Alt button to rotate. Um, Same thing here. And the reason as I said, I'm cutting is that I just want to avoid hassle with the algorithm. So I'm just manually cutting what I need to. And then I'm going to let the algorithm handle the rest after some working and tweaking. Um, but yeah,
The
I'm
loose
pretty
polys
sure
might
most of
be.
you know how to, I know. To unselect, I'm hitting Shift Control, just so you know. Again, me and my cardinal sins. So just setting that up for an unwrap, and I'm just getting rid of it because again, it's a cylinder. If you don't know how to unwrap a cylinder, I strongly suggest that you go back to basics. Um, Again, using Alt.
Yeah, and again, it's worth stressing
Cutting.
probably like if you're new to UV unwrapping, this is a lot more challenging than you typically will encounter. Um, Triangulation makes it a lot more
Then I
difficult,
have
I think.
yeah. Then I have a gift for picking the absolutely worst meshes I can find.
You like
Um,
a challenge, Kirsten.
yes, I do. This, as you can see, is not perfectly unwrapped. Um, I'll just select them to show where we may have. Ah, it's just not detached. Okay, fair enough. Just going to hit G to group it. I'm going to move it. And I'm just going to see. Ah, and again, this is the real hassle with mesh like that. It just never quite gets detached where you need it. So I'm just going to hit F4, then selecting, just hitting U, hitting P to pack, and I'm just going to hit H to hide it.
Nice.
Now the barrel, I can do several ways. I'm not sure, Paul, if you've got any input here, but my plan is to again, always place the seam under the
Yeah.
out of sight. So for me, this would be under. I'm in two minds whether I should actually just cut it here or
I
if
would.
I should keep it in. Okay.
I would, just because of the holes in the geometry in the upper part of the barrel. I think it's going to make it easier for you to unwrap if
Yeah,
you have a seam there.
it will be, but then again, you lose maybe what I'd call mesh cohesion because then you have everything
Yes.
again in little small parts,
Yeah. True.
which may be easy to work with. But for instance, in a game engine, you really have to
Yeah. Keep an eye on sort of
mind
cuts
your
and so on.
cuts.
Yeah. I think UV unwrapping is
So
one of
a
those
bit of manual.
things where there's like a trade-off. It's almost like you sort of have to decide what's best. So, for example, sometimes you might have to compromise some distance in your unwrap. I think for me anyway, I think UV can be a process of trade-off. Sometimes you have to kind of do things that you'd rather not do just to get sort of the unwrap done.
So just hovering over and selected it so I can hide it. Okay, so now we're in the country
Nice.
of stuff that I think the algorithm should handle. I'm going to F2 to hit edge loop mode again. I did make a pre-cut and I'm hoping that the algorithm will heed that. And this is where I just do a little bit of exploring of how I want the mesh to be cut because these actually do need to be cut because oops, um, they will generate issues. It cannot be unwrapped as is. It has to be sliced and diced. So I'm going to try this, but I'm also pretty sure that I'm going to have to manually stitch it together again. So this is why I'm actually exploring options on the hard edge algorithm. I may actually change to the mosaic algorithm, which is this one. I may also want to explore box, which is this one, and then circle and handle here. So I have many options to actually explore what it is I want to do. You guys following? What do I do with the loose polys? In general, if they are real loose polys, as in detached mesh, I usually just throw them in a group, and then in my modeler, I just delete the loose polys. But here right now, I just weld them in later. So if that answered your question, Mr. Zone Out or Miss Zone Out. Kind of waiting for the response. Okay, so here goes. First try, see if it gets what I want. It does to an extent, but as you can see, this unwraps perfectly. It's the innards that are the issue because they are not unwrapping perfectly. So I'm just going to, and that's also, as I said last week, the issue is that with a triangulated mesh, you also don't have symmetry, or you have symmetry but not enough to actually use the Alt C keys to choose more. So again, these are kind of challenging to work, but at the same time, it's kind of fun if you actually can make it work. So and then I'm just going to weld this together. And sometimes I just use optimize if I have mesh like that, but in this case it wasn't working. So I'm going to glue that together. So, and this is the hassle that I was talking about, that you actually do have to figure out how to best assemble this manually. So I am going to hover my mouse over this one And I'm going to hit H to hide it so I can see better where I'm at with this set, because it does make it easier to weld as well. So I am thinking that I'm going to weld these bits together. And I'm also going to think that I have no time for this, so I'm going to do this. I'm going to hit W, which was not a good idea because it then attached itself to the other mesh. What I'm trying to do is I want to flatten this into a non-wrapped or a non-cut state, and that's not always as easily said as done. So that's my whole purpose, because I do want to take a look and see if I can find an algorithm that's better suited for this. So I'm going to try this one. And again, always shows the cuts before we unwrap and map. I'm thinking that nope. Why? You have any comments, Paul?
No, I'm just wondering sort of which algorithm will be the most optimal. I guess again it's trial and error.
It's trial and error, but if you don't mind all the loose bits, I would say
Yeah,
hard edge
yeah.
set to a decent angle, and then maybe also using link holes and maybe a reweld setting. We briefly touched on reweld.
Yeah, last week.
And how that works. And as you can see, I lost my barrel, which is, yeah, pardon my French, since we're a French company, pain in the ass. I'm going to hit reweld though, just to see if I can get some better cuts. No, but I do get a better unwrap, as you can see.
Yeah, yeah.
These bits, those bits. Really depends on your preferences when you want to hit painter. I prefer stuff like this to be in one piece because, again, it just makes it easier for me to visualize what it actually I am doing in Painter.
I would
Your
agree.
style may vary,
Yep.
but models like these really are hard to work with. And the reason why I always end up with them is that as a freelancer and an illustrator, in many cases, you are given an asset by a client who wants something done for a certain scenario, certain situation, certain trade show. They usually contact you up to 2 days before the event. And then you just need to be really careful that you don't spend most of your time unwrapping what it is that you were given. So this is why I'm really good with bad mesh, because I've pretty much seen them all. What
Becoming
I'm
used
hitting
to
now
it.
is F7, just, yeah, really used to it. You get desensitized. I hit F7 because that's the optimized brush. I didn't want to unwrap everything again. So now I'm going to hit
Just when
Q
you're
to
doing
get
that,
out of it. And
Kirsten, just a question just relating to what you're doing. So Zone was sort of saying, what are the messed up endings you get when welding? I think he was referring to the parts that you've just optimized, I think.
I think so. Those are just the parts that I'm trying to glue together.
So they were unwrapped as separate pieces,
Yeah.
but they're part of the same element. They look messed up initially just
Yes.
because they haven't been optimized.
Yes. And that's actually worth noting. Okay, so we did answer your question. Zone out. A lot of times when I have problem mesh, oh, I'm welding by hitting the W button.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, guys, we do have, I'll just bring up Discord. In our Discord channel, I made a free stuff channel.
There's a cheat sheet.
In the free stuff channel, there is a cheat sheet. Cut, unwrap, weld. It's got unwrap twice just because I thought it was very important. And I'm making a new cheat sheet either tonight or tomorrow because I want to have another one out by SIGGRAPH. So you can look forward to that. And that is actually going to be all about auto seams.
Nice.
Yes, Arglefark, hello. So did that answer your question?
I think he said yes. Or she,
Yeah,
I'm
I'm
assuming.
also going to say. Yeah.
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that's where loose polys go. So I'm hitting F7 again. Ah, wrong window, sorry. I'm hitting F7 again. I'm also going to brush out these because as I was saying that a lot of time with mesh like this, you can UV all you want, but that will distort it a bit too enthusiastically. So I prefer the, what shall I say, softer, gentler touch of the optimized brush because it really is the handiest. For me, it's the MVP in many problem cases because I have more control. Um, Even though I know a lot of people are going to disagree with me.
I would agree with you. I think it's
Actually, Paul,
underused though. Yeah,
I
I
have
would
a
agree with you,
question for you
Kirsten.
actually.
Uh-huh.
Okay, do have a question for you. So I'm attaching this into a cross. I'm also going to just tidy my workspace a bit
Pack.
because I'm finicky like that.
Mm-hmm.
So would this be better attached like it is, or would it be better off loose? Because I can actually never make up my mind. For me, it means less
Generally,
cuts to work with.
yeah. Generally, it would depend on the nature of your high poly. So if the high poly equivalent of whatever that piece was having detail baked to those edges, then I would generally advise. I think the rule of thumb is hard edge. You generally will want to have a UV seam. So if I was doing it, I would generally be doing it for game, and I generally would have a hard mesh bake in mind, and I would generally cut across those hard edges.
Okay, so you would actually keep it like,
I would cut where you're selecting now. Yeah.
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 Um, because for me, it's all about keeping it together so I know where and what I'm doing. But for
If
you,
it
it
was
would
a
make
mid
more sense to
poly,
just,
if it was a mid poly piece that wasn't going to be baked, or if there wasn't detail that needed to be put on that part, then you could look at that certainly. But if you think about even a cube, classic example that I would use is that if you have a cube, um, the simplest sort of geometric shape you can think of, which essentially is the cross when it's unwrapped. If you want to bake, say you sort of put soft edges on the cube, curved sort of rounded edges on the cube, those faces would need to be, generally speaking, cut so they all set as separate UV shells with padding for the bake to work. So generally, I would say, yeah, cut.
I get that.
I,
See, for me, it drives me crazy to have all these loose bits lying around.
yeah, I think that would make a really good
But
topic
again,
down the line, like to have a focused session on baking.
packing.
So yeah, so take a separate object, a simpler object probably than this, and look at sort of what happens when we cut this way and what happens when we cut another way. That might be worth doing. Um,
Absolutely. You're going to join us for that?
yeah, I'm down.
Okay. Then
High
we're most
fuller
definitely
axis
doing that.
sounds good. It would be nice to have the
See how
keystrokes
that got?
displayed on the screen. Sorry, I'm just reading chat. Sorry,
Yeah,
Kirsten.
Yeah, I know, I saw that, but that's not happening today.
No.
Use the cheat sheet because I'm not using anything that's not on the cheat sheet today. Um, it's also on Twitter. If you go to RizomUV on Twitter, you can download it there, or you can download it from our Facebook page. You don't have to log into Discord to grab the cheat sheet. So again, I'm just pretty much using the basic commands just to assemble this. Again, this is a mix of manual and algo stuff. I don't know how much more interest this gun barrel is before we move on to the next few bits. Any questions apart from keystrokes and welding? So both Paul and I are like really anticipatory watching the chat.
I think there will be zone. Kirsten, this will be available as a VOD on the
I
Rizom
think so, yeah.
Twitch. Yeah, I think
Yes,
so. Last one was,
it will be.
so should be there for you yet.
Okay, good. Um, any other questions? Thank you. Appreciate it. Uh, glad to know that it is useful because you're always going out on a limb with something as exciting as UV mapping. That's something that really bothers me. A lot of articles these days are just starting with, well, I know that UV mapping really isn't fun, but you just have to do it. And the thing is that software has come so far that, you know, it's you still have to do some stuff manually, but if I was really lazy, and some days I am, I'm just going to load it with no UV, sorry. I can always uh, load it. I can hit F2. I can just check the cuts. I can do that. And ta-da! I have completely and utterly
It's unwrapped.
just,
Ta-da!
yeah. But there's no, I don't know, there's no art in that, I think. Or there is, I mean, technically, but you do need to give it a little TLC.
I think something we've talked
So,
about before, Kirsten, as well, just when you mentioned about maybe sort of the negativity or the, I guess we called it the stigma towards UVing. And it sounds kind of biased to say it on the Ryzen stream, but I do think it's worthy to mention that Ryzen has made it a lot more appealing. That's coming from somebody, both of us have used other things to unwrap. And I do think that Ryzen is sort
yes,
of,
well, this,
yeah. So, you know, I've been doing this for over 10 years. I've used various different applications. And they all have pros and cons, but I do think Ryzen has a greater accessibility to it in terms of making UV unwrapping easier to understand.
okay. Addressing the chat questions now.
Mm-hmm.
What is TLC? TLC means tender loving care, which means that you pay some, yeah, you just pay attention to what you're doing. His Highness Argolfark. Can't walk around with a name like that.
What's wrong with Arglefark?
It
Perfectly
makes
legit
me
name.
laugh. It makes me, yeah.
I think it's awesome.
I'm just interested that it's best to leave hard edge items separated.
I usually try to keep
I
all
usually try.
together, which would explain how bakes never go right. Yeah. I think what we might do,
So,
if Kirsten supports it, is do like a little session on that. Then maybe even just with like a basic cube, you can demonstrate a lot about the baking process and how UVs affect the bake. So maybe in the future we
Absolutely.
could do that. Yeah. But yeah, Arglefar, generally speaking,
Absolutely.
you need to separate. If there's a hard edge in your mesh, generally
You need to
speaking, that's
split
going to
it.
be a UV seam. Yeah, that's the general rule of thumb. Cool.
So I thought that I'd also digress into packing.
Sounds good.
Um, Need to take two things into consideration. If you're on 4K, you need to have you can define yourself on your island spacing, but your gutter in general needs to be set at 32. So I'm doing that. And this is just to give it proper mip mapping space. Or color bleed. It does affect color bleed. Um, I'm not. I just cast a glance at my screen. Zone up. I'm not sure what you mean.
That
While you
was
explain what you mean, I am going to cover the packing algorithm because that really is a piece of magic. Um, So in packing, you've got fast, you've got normal, you've got high, and then you've got gold. Gold is the gold standard if you have, and it is time consuming, but it gives you the ultimate packing together with the iterations. So this, as it obviously says, is the quality of the pack. So I'm going to set it to high. I'm going to set it to 100, which means that I want it to try in 100 iterations to find the best way for a pack. And then I'm just going to hit, yeah, I've got auto fit set on. And then I'm just going to hit the pack button. And then you will hopefully see on the screen that it just shuffles things around, so to say, or so to speak. And at the end, it will have optimized every piece of space for the ultimate pack, which is very handy if you actually have to hand over stuff to clients or game engines.
Mm-hmm. It seems like a total mess to me. Is it something I could turn in as a UV map of a model for a pro freelancer job if I was tasked to model? Um, the auto UV? Is that the question zone?
Yes, and I think I know what you're talking about. So this is pretty much just to show workflow. It's not to show, the ultimate perfect UV for a client. But what I would do, and I have done this with clients, is that you always divide. That's rule number one. Always make some kind of group. I don't care if it's an object group, material group, or a poly group, or a smoothing group. Group. And then you unwrap per group and you pack per group because that does make it much easier to hand it over to your clients. It makes it a hell of a lot easier to texture, and it also looks much, much better than this. Um, you may remember that the reason that I just did a one-click unwrap was to just show that you can actually do it. Did that make sense to you, Sonat?
No, not
Why would
necessarily.
you want? No, I'll show you. I'll stop the pack and I will show you. So I'm pressing F4 for island mode and I'm selecting the barrel. Do you see everything barrel is now lighting up on the screen? I am pressing G to group that. I'm hitting, I just need to tweak my settings here. So and then just hitting P to pack. I'm just going to stop the pack. So, and then I'm going to select the next group, which is barrel 2. Same thing there, just going to group it. Sorry, mispressed. As you can see, they light up on the screen again. Pack it. Selecting the metal bits, grouping it, packing it. And it will not be layered on top of each other. I'm just right now just walking you through how to, for instance, typically group something. Yes, and you don't need UDIMs for that. And you can also, because Zonout asked, I think I understand the goal is to have parts of a group in one segment of the UV space. Yes, but they can intermingle unless you lock them. And you can also layer them. So it's, is it still called multi-tile, Paul?
Yeah, that's what I call it anyway.
So you can go, yeah, you can go multi-tile rather than UDIM, and a multi-tile means that everything is just stacked on top of each other, and then it's separated out by, for instance, substance and other applications by the name of the group. Actually, I can show you that. Let me finish grouping.
So generally for game res meshes zone, you're not going to really encounter UDIMs. 99.9% of the UV stuff that you do for games will be non-UDIM.
No, and then I just have garbage polys here. As I said, they do
Yeah,
happen.
it's a challenging example.
Well, at least it's not last week's motorbike, though.
True, true. We're getting better.
Just packing those. Okay, so as you can see, this would be a typical multi-tile UV. Now I can also pack it. I'm just going to dial down the settings a bit. So unless you lock the groups, then not getting the best of packs. So I'm just going to stop it. Something isn't behaving as it should. So right now I'm clicking F, or I'm clicking fit, and I'm also double checking that auto fit is set, and then I'm going to try repacking. No, still not behaving. I think I found a bug. So now I'm just double clicking one group, dragging to position. I'm sorry. I know that I should be talking, but sometimes I forget to talk because I'm focusing on what I'm doing. I'm sorry about that.
You're doing, yeah. So the benefit of this is like organizational. It just helps you sort of micromanage where things are inside your unwrap. By putting certain pieces in certain places. That makes texturing somewhat easier as well. but this is not a UDIM. This is still all within the 0 to 1 or the 1 tile space.
Yes.
How did you lock them? What's the shortcut for a lock, Kirsten? I can't remember.
I haven't locked them, but the shortcut for locking is this. You need to make sure that auto fit is turned off. Select your group, and then you hit
Okay.
lock. Then if you hit pack, it will move the tile, but it will not change the contents of the tile on the inside.
Yeah.
And I'm starting to realize that this is a really bad example because for some reason it's tiling on top of each other, and I think I found a bug. Because it's not supposed to do that.
No, I'm a bit confused about that as well. Unless it's the loose polys that are doing it, but I'm not sure.
I don't think so, but in the end we did end up with a nice pack. Do you see how it arranged everything here? I lock them. Okay, I'm going to do that again. Oops, sorry. Okay, so you uncheck auto fit. Then you select your group, and you can select your group by double clicking on it. Press lock and press lock. So I'm also keeping the average. If you keep the average, it means that you keep the average island ratio. So that's really handy if you need to do a stretch check. I press that button for the stretch check map, and then I'm going to go to texture multiplier to just make it fit. Yeah.
Nice.
And then I am just going to hit pack. So it will move stuff on the locked islands, but it will not overlap. Whereas on maybe some of the non-locked islands, there may be overlaps and some spacing issues. So again, you do need to work out how it looks. But I can show you a very pretty UV map if you're interested. Uh, the empty space is because I just ran the normal algorithm and I ran just 10 iterations. If you run it on gold and you run it on, for instance, 1K, if you let it, it depends on time, but it will pick the most optimal use of size, and that also means that it will reduce size or reduce the amount of space used. In addition, if you are locking something, that means that the inside of that locked tile, they oh God, I completely lost my buffer because somebody wanted to see a pretty UV map. Okay, let me find my buffer while I find the pretty UV map, okay? I'm sorry if that was too much of a digression.
That's fine.
And some of you may know that, yes, it is the spider. I am so tired of that spider now. So this is a spider that I used for the ad that I did for ArtStation, or Rizom ArtStation during Easter. And this, I know several people think that this is the most OCD UV map ever, and I think yes, but it's pretty. So,
Can't argue with that.
no. So actually, this also drove home an interesting point which I discussed last week. Sometimes you have to be really careful of how you cut, because if it's something that you're giving to a client, some things may look somewhat misleading. So make sure that you're cuts, for instance, don't have these bits here in the lower parts because, yeah, that doesn't look good. Yes. To answer the question, yes, these are UDIMs. And you set up a UDIM by going down to multi-tile down here, and you add the amount of tiles that you want. So I just needed 3. So that's the amount I defined, and then you can also add more maps on top. Did this explain? And also, did it show that you actually can make pretty UV maps? And I have to admit that I did use auto seams on a lot of the cutting that I did here. And the reason why it looks so good and the reason why it was so easy was that this is very clean geometry. So that just makes it a lot easier to work with. So thank you. I think I spent about 2 hours on this, and most of the time that I spent on this was making it pretty. So for instance, I showed this to some of you last week, but I can do it again. I'm just going to weld these. Actually, this is where Control M comes in handy. See, with clean geometry, everything it's just easier.
Everything works better.
I'm just going to hit F. Yes, I'm just going to hit F2 so I can weld. And this is how you weld everything together. So you can see on the spider's legs that they're all red. They're not particularly well unwrapped. What I did with the spider legs. So I'm just going to hit Control M to select similar geometry again. I'm going to hit I to isolate them. What I did with these was an actual super simple pelt unwrap because they are very simple geometry. All you need is an edge cut on one side of the leg. You need that square on top split somehow, and then I was about to say for shits and giggles, but just to keep it tidy, you also need a cut down here. And a pelt is actually ideal for that. So I'm going to turn off advanced settings. I'm going to just do a cut, and as you can see, very clean cut, very easy. And then I am just going to hit the cut, unwrap, and pack button. Just going to hit Control M again to group them. Then I am going to flip. Did I forget any? No.
Oh, that's the most.
And again with the not behaving. I am going to align them, and this is actually a feature that I asked if we could implement in Rizom. In Photoshop that you have a line and then spread on a vertical or horizontal edge. I have asked for that to be implemented after SIGGRAPH.
That'd be really
I don't
useful,
understand why
actually.
these two. I know.
Yeah, that's a really good call.
I mean, that's one of the reasons why I'm actually product manager, because we actually do need to know the software rather than being a marketing person, because marketing people No, the marketing, well, product managers actually also know the software damn well.
It's something that you do quite
Uh,
frequently, so having it as a feature would be, or a
yeah,
function would be really good.
yeah. So, but zero out. Uh, does this sort of restore your faith a little bit? I like to pick difficult meshes because for me they just represent a challenge that I find interesting. Um, but there's so many ways to do stuff easier as well. So I'm going to bring back the rest of the spider. And as you can see, I also have groups here. I'm just going to test
I think it's
something.
worthy to
So
just reinforce, Kirsten, that this mesh is probably more typical of what people will encounter. Like in terms of what you typically will be unwrapping. If you're modeling stuff or you're working in a team that's modeling stuff, the likelihood is that the topology is going to be quite good. So don't be off put, I think. Sometimes you look at these more challenging meshes and you can see how difficult they are in comparison to this. Things work better with good topology. It's like all systems, what you feed into it is generally what you get out of it. So
okay, for those of you who are paying attention, I did something again. What I did, and this is actually really handy before you actually start UV mapping. So I'm going to try loading the spider before I use it for more UV mapping examples. So I'm loading it without a UV map, but with groups, yeah? So again, the reason that it shows as black is that I've got it set to show unwrapped and wrapped parts, and all the black areas are unwrapped. So the first thing I'm going to do is that I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 groups. Okay, so I'm going to go 4 and 2. I'm going to select all my groups. I'm going to zoom out. And this is simply just to make life easier. You don't have to do what I do. Then, with your selection still active, you can go in tiles. Then it will spread even the non-wrapped stuff into separate tiles. If you then press in new groups, you don't have to do any manual grouping. It's already done for you. Yeah, which means that it makes it so much easier to unwrap. So if I then go to selection mode, isolate, just moving that off the screen a bit, F2 to enter that mode again. Um, do a selection on the legs, and then I'm just going to make a cut on the cylinders, and that's again a pure example of tidy geometry because nothing inside because the edges or the tops, is that what you call it? Tops of the cylinders
mhm.
won't be seen, they're just removed. So that keeps your geometry also nice and clean and easy to unwrap. This really is uh, what I would call a school example of a good unwrap or a good mesh. What I did now was I hit Control C to see if I could find similar edges to select, or Alt C rather, sorry. Let's, I think that it slows it down because there are so many other edges already selected. Okay, I'm going to leave that for now. I'm just going to hit Pack, and it does what it just did. Also unwrap the cylinders, but what I'm going to do now is just going to hit Alt C because that will select if it's symmetrical geometry, it will select all similar edges, yeah? So I just hit C. Then I'm going to change to F4, and then I'm going to hit Control M to select all these. And that's also another thing that I've asked Remy to implement, hierarchical groups, so you can have a group within a group, because in cases like this, that's also really handy. Just going to hit Unwrap, and then I'm going to hit P for Pack. And then again, rinse, repeat with these. So and then pack. And what I did to get the UV map super tidy was just use the align tools, and I used the straightening tools and just made it pretty. Okay, so I'm going to hit Y to bring stuff back. And that's my phone, and I'm not going to answer it. So I'm just going to hit U for unwrap, and then I'm going to hit P for pack there. And what I also like to do in my process is that I unwrap first and then I tidy it afterwards.
Yeah.
So, and this is actually a challenging piece to unwrap these. And this is where AutoCAD really, really shines. So I'm going to isolate this. And it's the bits and bobs on the spider's legs. So I do prefer a manual cut for this mesh. So I'm going to do that first. Also, this is a good tip. Remember that the default here is set to 20, but you can add any number you want here. And if you really want to go to town, you can also add formulae. Just casually mentioning.
That's good to know.
So, made my cut. To put cut here. But I am also, just because I want to keep it together, I am going to keep these. And yes, Paul, I know, but it looks tidier. And then I'm going to go Alt-C, so I can transfer these to the other islands with similar layouts. Then I'm going to hit C. Then I am going to go back to island mode. I'm going to hit Control M to select the similar ones, and then I'm going to unwrap those by pressing U. As I said, it can take a bit because it's doing its job. So, and yeah, as you can see, that's a rather unfortunate unwrap, but you can pack it and you can just align it. And again, you just need to also do manual tidying. So for instance, sometimes I like to go, oops, sorry, I just set it to 45, and then pack it again. And then it will pack at the angle that you defined. Something is in need of an optimize here, I think. So you can always make sure to use these parts, and then also the entire menu over here to make it nice and tidy. I'm going to hide these because for mesh like this is really where the algorithms shine, because they do make life a hell of a lot easier. So that was really it. I think I'm going to increase my edge cuts a little bit. Again, you also need to just be okay with tinkering just a little bit. And now they will unwrap. And again, it's always a question of how many bits and pieces do you want. I usually want them less. So I again explored the algorithms and what they can offer. As you can see, this is a much cleaner cut, but again at the price of more islands. So you need to figure out how many islands you can actually live with, by matter of speaking, and how many not. So I remember doing the cut in the original one. I think I actually used box and then I used reweld without going into detail. So what a reweld does, and this is also again super handy, is that once it has made a cut, oh, Argo Falk, I'm not going to get into your child rearing habits. One thing that you can actually do is to explore the reweld option. Because what that does is that after it's cut and after it's been unwrapped, especially if you've got also stretch control on, then it will try to weld stuff together again, which can actually be quite beneficial sometimes.
I
So as
think
you can
it's
see,
worth
stuff
stressing.
is
I think experimentation's something to sort of maybe encourage as well. Like we were talking about, just trying out things. Like I think people should be encouraged to sort of dive in and just sort of see what things happen. Don't be afraid of, because there's always Control Z. You can always go back and sort of undo things. So I think these algorithms are there to be explored.
absolutely. And that's something that maybe it's just a sign of me getting old, but what I miss is people actually being interested in putting in the actual work. Because
Mm,
good unwraps, just like good textures, they take work. It really is
yeah,
that simple.
yeah, I
So
agree.
trying it again. As you can see, as I go, more and more bits are getting welded together, and the risk here is that you don't want to end up with ugly mesh that's all welded together. So um, my ideal algo I found for this, well, I'm just going to turn this off. So I actually do remember exploring this as well. So hard edge and then a re-weld. That actually also worked really well for me on this. Apparently not today, but it did. I'm sorry.
But yeah, experimentation and trial and error are definitely to be encouraged, I think, when it comes to these things.
Absolutely. Um, One thing that I have an issue with, as you may have noticed, is that I really don't like too many loose edges. So
Hmm.
I'm pretty enthusiastic about avoiding them. What I ended up doing though was a combination of algorithm and manual. So I ended up cutting out, with the help of the algorithm, just ended up cutting out these bits.
Yeah.
And again, it doesn't take too much time. And then I just cut and unwrapped and packed them separately so they were together. I'm just going to turn this off.
I think that's quite common to combine algorithms with some manual work as well. I do that quite a lot.
I think it's unavoidable if
Yeah,
you,
yeah.
because that's
Is it okay to have a
okay.
little bit of
Argle,
stretching?
eh. Yes. I hate to say it, but yes. But it depends on where the stretching is, though. It has to be a little bit. You guys are familiar how stretch displays on UVs, right? Because that's pretty industry standard.
Yeah, it's definitely okay to have some.
Yeah, this is what I ended up doing.
Yeah.
So I cut that. And then yeah, as you can see, this is magnificent stretch. And then I went Alt-C. And I cut them out like that. And then I just kept unwrapping from there. And I also made a cut through
Down the middle. Yeah.
here. I haven't, yeah. So again, just use it together. And of course I forgot to cut, I'm sorry. It's getting a little late, my end. And then you also cut across here.
I think what Kirsten's doing right now kind of emphasizes something we were talking about earlier as well, where we talked about unwrapping is kind of an art. Like obviously there's scientific guidelines that underpin how and the way you should approach an unwrap. But I think everyone will have their own unique way. Like Kirsten would probably unwrap different than I would unwrap to similar end results. So I think you sort of figure out your own way of kind of how you approach the unwrapping. And I think a great way to learn that is to experiment with the tools that you're given.
Absolutely. I don't think you can argue with that. Of course, the problem here is that I forgot half of what I did with the spider. Um, but
Yeah,
the
but
end
we get
result, and I
yeah,
did do the end result myself, was that actually I am doing a
nice.
tutorial about how I did all the unwraps on the spider. So the unwrap for this bit was
Yeah.
that as I said, I cut out all the middle bits, these ones, and then I just aligned them. I'm pretty sure that Paul would have unwrapped it differently because, again, game engine, so he would probably have cut
Yeah.
this and he would have cut that.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and he would also, this is, you can probably always tell that it's me doing the unwrap because I've got this habit of always putting my cuts there. And again, for me, it's about keeping it together. I don't want loose polys flying all over the space, and sometimes you can't delete them. Another thing that I like to do is I like to keep it straight.
Yeah, that's a good point.
So
Yeah.
on mesh like that, I would straighten it, but I would actually not unwrap it. I would just quickly optimize it because it's much, much quicker.
That's a really good tip. And that can
So
really help
you
with
can do this.
texturing when you do that. It might seem like an insignificant thing, but that actually makes texturing those pieces a lot easier.
Yes. Actually, Paul, do you have any insights on stacking? Because I do stills, I
Hmm.
don't stack and I don't group them much. But what about you in a game engine? Should you stack? Shouldn't you not? Shouldn't
Again,
you
it
stack?
depends what you're doing it for. So again, typically I wouldn't. Um, just because quite often you're baking different information to similar parts of the mesh. So where you might be able to stack with just the texture information, the normals or other elements that you're sort of putting in those parts are not going to be the same. So it depends on again on what you're doing. I certainly have used stacks to help improve sort of packing efficiency and so on, but generally speaking, I wouldn't do it that much. Um, Unless I'm doing something like mid poly where I'm avoiding the baking. That's a really good tip there in terms of straightening up the mesh with optimization. I would probably have repacked those normally, but that's actually a better way of doing it, I think, whereby you use the optimized brush. So I've learned
And for
something.
those who wonder what, yeah, for those who wonder what stacking is like, you select one main island and you just go Alt G. If you want to lock it, you just press lock, and then see what happens when you hit pack. As you can see, it's moved in position, but nothing inside it has moved. And the
So
same
that helps with
for,
efficiency of space, which is something you will want to achieve where you can.
yes. So Alt G again, lock, Alt G, lock. And you can just do this ad nauseum, so until everything's just packed until Kingdom comes.
Is
Same
there a
with these.
shortcut key for lock, Kirsten? Is there a shortcut command for lock? I
Not as
don't know
far
it,
as I
but
know, but you can map it.
yeah. I'm just wondering because it's
Yeah,
something
you can map it though.
yeah, I must look into that because I wasn't aware of what the shortcut is. Sorry, I interrupted you.
That's fine. Again, lock, lock, lock. And this is where the packing algorithm also comes in really handy because
Yeah.
you're selecting it. And now I'm going to go just one tile. And because it's fairly light geometry, I'm going to try 100 iterations. I'm not going to group them. I'm just going to have them loose just to show how space can be optimized. I'm going to set 32 here. And I'm going to just hit, yeah. I do realize that I've got autofit off. That may be an issue. But I'm going to try anyway right now. Yeah.
Okay, Zone. Thank you for dropping by this. Yeah.
A good evening, good night for it's a good night for us. Thank you, Zone Out. Yeah, the video is also going to be available, but as you can see, the packing here is a hell of a lot more efficient because again, it's got clean geometry, so uh, it's just easier to place things. It's just easier to do things. I think I like to show problem meshes because I like a challenge. You're right, Paul. Um, but again, for me, an optimal workflow in regards to this would to just be to group everything together so it stays all nice and clean.
Yeah. That's quite a lot we've covered, or you've covered tonight. more insight into the packing process, the unwrapping
Oh
process,
joy.
some more tips and tricks, and some really useful information.
I hope so. Um, we did promise a raffle.
Oh,
So last week what we did was we just scrolled up and down until somebody said stop.
okay.
So do you want to do the honors?
So just using the chat on the right hand
Yes.
side, just okay. So I'm scrolling up and down. You say stop.
Stop.
Zonat, Mr. Zonat 30.
Okay. Ooh. Oh, that's good though. Congratulations.
I'm not sure if he's still here or not, but I'm sure he'll see this in the
Hmm.
video when he watches it tomorrow.
Yay. That's good though. I do know that, some
Congratulations.
people can. Yes.
What did he win? Is
Okay, I'm
it
still
like
waiting
a
for that
oh
a year's license of an
ah
indie
that's a
VS.
pretty cool prize. Very good prize.
Yes, or a year's extension. Okay, so it does look like the algorithm has kind of decided that it does need more tweaking. So, but as you can see, the space optimization is really good because it also does pack inside of holes and gaps,
Yeah. Yeah.
and it just puts everything where it's supposed to be. So, but again, it's important that you group your stuff because it's just better mesh hygiene, for lack of better phrasing.
That's a good
So I'm
term.
just going to,
Mesh hygiene.
yeah, just going to quickly put stuff into groups.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and then I'm going to try packing again. So as you can see, it's kind of trying to figure out right now what to put where and how to best put it. And then when it's finished, it will be all nice and groupy, so to speak. Actually, if this was a video, you would just cut the time
Yeah.
it would take to group. And
Here's one we prepared
I
earlier.
did set it
Yeah.
to 100. Yeah,
Might
set it
take a little minute
to
or two.
100
Yeah.
iterations. I'll set it to 10 instead, and then do the pack again. So yeah, you can see much better that it's moving around now.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Almost there. So again, so there is quality and there is iterations, and you can of course have, fast quality fast quality with 1,000 iterations, but to me that would be kind of pointless. And this is what I was kind of afraid of. I don't have auto fit on, and auto fit makes everything fit inside one tile.
Yeah.
So remember that if you are doing your final pack, and you do have some groups and you do have some locks, always check your fit or auto fit settings because they do have significance as to how the final layout works. I do think that
Hmm.
this is going to behave in the end, but I'm not 100%. And also you always keep an eye on the noise bar down here where I'm waving my mouse, and you press the orange button or escape to stop. So right now it's at 92 for that mesh. So again, this is pretty much the slowest part in the whole of Rise. I'm just waiting for, the high quality settings to apply. Uh, but on the upside, it means that you won't have to pack. You can just leave it to the algorithm because that's what they're made for.
This is generally where I go and make a cup of tea in my
Yes.
workflow.
So, but I'm just going to stop it there because that's just taking too much time.
I think they get the general idea anyway.
Yeah. Another thing that I think I showed last week, but that I can show again because it's really damn useful. You can define your packing settings. I'm just going to go normal and 10. I'm going to hit that one for P. See, so if you want to pack something and you want it horizontal instead of vertical, you can always do that. Same with a big group like this. And just flip it. Or you can turn it off. And you can set it at an angle. And this is pretty handy when you actually lock it, because if you packed it at an angle in a group and you want to keep your settings, again, turn off auto fit and hit the lock button. So, but I do realize that it's getting late. It's 10:30 here. So, any questions? Yes, Argolvark has a point that it's standard across the industry that good stuff takes time, and this is true.
Agreed.
Okay, I'm sorry for dead air. I'm just waiting for a response. Okay, then I think I am going to wrap it up. Um, there will be a tutorial for the spider and the rifle down the road. This was just a general
Cool.
walkthrough of techniques and what issues you can come across. And then while Team Rizom is traveling to Siggraf, Indie Respawn is back with his take on all things UV mapping, and I suspect he's either going to do a Gambeson or he's going to do something photogrammatic.
Cool.
Yeah,
Is
so
that
we're going to leave it at that.
next same day next week? Is that when that's happening? In the respawn stream?
Same, yeah, yeah,
Yeah. Okay.
probably later in the day though. But
Yeah.
thanks everybody for watching, and a special thanks for you, Paul, for stepping in on short
No.
notice.
Thank you for having me.
Uh,
Really good.
so thank you. Yeah. Thanks, guys, and we'll see you next week.